The talk of greater European involvement in Ukraine's defense is heating up as drone sightings over EU countries rise. So this video asks a specific question. If the situation escalates and Russia decides for whatever reason to invade the three Baltic states, could NATO respond in time to prevent Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia from being overrun? Yep, we made a Binkov plushie. If you want one for yourself or as a gift, do check out our crowd-made store. The link is available below in the video description. It's not too small, not too big, perfect for your desk or your shelf next to your military history books. Or you can give it away. We've made it as low cost as humanly possible, which is very hard when you're contracting very small production runs. Well, go ahead and treat yourself. The Baltics are chosen deliberately. They are closest to Russia and the easiest NATO countries to take. Comparing NATO as a whole to Russia suggests NATO has the advantage, but reality is different. Russia is tied down in Ukraine. Much of its force would not be free to be used against the Baltics. On the other hand, NATO's unity is showing cracks. Would Turkey or Hungary commit? Or would Trump send a large force? Moreover, NATO forces are spread far out, not concentrated near the Baltics. Russian invasion would need to be a surprise, hard to achieve today without leaks. Baltic states' population is 7 times smaller than Ukraine, and their militaries are far weaker. But let us look at the numbers. Estonia fields a few thousand troops, 20 to 40,000 reservists and paramilitaries, CV-90 IFVs, K9 howitzers and shoulder-fired air defenses. Other NATO countries' troops add 2,000 personnel, half an armored brigade and 1 NASAMS battery. Latvia, though larger, has fewer troops, just a few thousand plus 16,000 reservists. It lacks armored firepower but has many howitzers and RBS-70 SAMs. Other NATO countries contribute 4,000 troops, 1 armored brigade worth, and 2 small SAM batteries. Lithuania has the biggest army, 10,000 troops, 30,000 reservists, Boxer IFVs, German self-propelled howitzers, and NASAMS and RBS-70 SAMs. Other NATO countries add 3,000 personnel, about 2/3 of an armored brigade. Together the Baltics can field 26,000 troops within days, backed by 49,000 structured reservists, equipped with light weapons. 39,000 paramilitaries are mostly donning just rifles and lack meaningful combined arms training. Estonia has 230,000 residents eligible for mobilization, and mass call-ups would occur across all 3 countries. In theory, nearly 1 million could be mobilized in the Baltics, about 2/3 of all men aged 18 to 60. But Ukraine's experience suggests only 1% of the population was quickly mobilized, some 400,000 in the first 3 months. For the Baltics, that would represent 60,000 troops, essentially just the structured reserves plus some extras. In reality, there likely aren't enough weapons stored to arm far more than that. But the Baltics are not Ukraine. Mobilization requires secure locations and unobstructed communications, easier in large Ukraine and harder in the Baltics close to Russia. Estonia has much of its population near the Russian border, with Tallinn only 170 kilometers away. Latvia's population is centered in Riga, 220 kilometers from the border. Lithuania is somewhat better off, not bordering mainland Russia, though Kaliningrad lies to its southwest. That Russian exclave would plausibly be pressured by Poland, keeping its forces defensive rather than offensive. Still, most of Lithuania's population lives between Kaliningrad and Belarus, with the capital Vilnius only 30 kilometers away from Belarus. The Baltics are better prepared for mobilization than Ukraine was, organization-wise, but they lack strategic depth, no ability to trade land for time. There would be far fewer defenders, though the territory is sizable. The three Baltic states together are about one-third of Ukraine's area, and larger than the southeastern Ukraine, where the war has dragged on for 3.5 years. Belarus would be politically crucial. In 2022, it supported Russia enough to host troops attacking Ukraine. But since then, support has waned. Russian missile overflights ended by 2023, and Belarus has not hosted offensive ground forces again. Most Belarusians oppose involvement, and President Lukashenko balances close military ties with Russia with avoiding deeper war participation. It is not guaranteed Belarus would allow Russia to stage an attack on Lithuania. Without Belarus, Russia's task would be far harder. It's likely Russia would not even attempt it without Belarus. But for argument's sake, let's assume Belarus complies and another large exercise like Zapad 2021 takes place in Belarus and Western Russia. In theory, Russia could mass 100,000 troops near the Baltics and call it training. Zapad drills are held every 4 years and were usually large. The 2021 edition involved over 200,000 troops, though Zapad 2025 was notably smaller, showing Russia struggles to gather large forces now. Smaller drills occurred in between. What sort of troops could Russia actually gather for a Baltic campaign while still fighting in Ukraine? In September, Putin said 700,000 troops are engaged in Ukraine. That suggests 200 to 250,000 soldiers at the front lines at any time, as troops need rotation and support. Reservists from 3 years ago have mostly been replaced by contract soldiers and outside volunteer formations. Today, around 300,000 conscripts serve in the Russian military, kept away from combat to avoid public unrest over casualties. The strategic rocket force is uninvolved, as are most naval assets. The Pacific and Northern fleets are far larger than the Black Sea Fleet. Regarding forces in Ukraine, the 200,000 plus frontline troops there effectively need doubling for rotation. Russian Air Force flies 100 to 200 strike sorties daily, factoring in fighter escort and support missions, as well as U.S. long-term campaign historic sortie rates. Roughly half of tactical aviation is dedicated to Ukraine. Helicopters are likely even more heavily used. SAM units are tied down defending Russian territory. So over 100,000 Air Force personnel may be committed to Ukraine. Adding some National Guard units and support personnel, probably 500,000 ground troops are in Ukraine, plus about 100,000 in the Air Force and Air Defense, and at least half of the 200,000 command and support staff. With some Black Sea naval personnel and railway troops, the total reaches over the 700,000 figure. That would leave any Baltic operation with about 100,000 or fewer command and support troops, half the Air Force, and some 300,000 ground troops, most of them conscripts with only 6 months service on average. They would face 26,000 active Baltic troops and possibly much of the 60,000 mobilized reservists, depending on surprise, speed, and disruption of mobilization. But other factors matter too. Even with complete surprise and no NATO buildup, NATO maintains units able to deploy quickly. 9 corps-level commands can field 60,000 troops, from rapid airborne units in days to heavier forces in 2 months. Light airborne brigades would likely be first, arriving within days. Poland, right next door, could self-deploy some heavy brigades quickly. 4 bases near Lithuania could send battalions within days. Poland also has brigades right next to Kaliningrad, but those would likely have a separate mission. A realistic escalation might look like this: a quarter of active-duty Baltic troops deployed within a day, another quarter within 2 days, and the full 26,000 within several days. Reservists and paramilitaries needing no refresher training would also deploy quickly. Mind you, mobilization time is not the same as deployment time. Even active troops are not in position 24/7. Additional NATO forces and retrained reservists would take longer, slowing the pace of reinforcements between the first and second month. But within a few months, if NATO remains united, regular armies could arrive in large numbers, eventually pushing total NATO forces in theater past 500,000. All this may make it sound like Russia would have an easy first few days. If total surprise is achieved, the first day could be a rapid advance, up to 50 miles down certain roads, potentially bypassing fortifications that are ineffective if not fully manned. But total surprise is unlikely. After the Ukraine invasion lesson, NATO and the Baltics would act on most intelligence. Even with Ukraine, there was warning, yet most assumed it was just Russian posturing. The best-case Russian plan would be to redirect personnel from a large exercise, but even that would likely give at least a day of warning. Russia faces a dilemma: invade with a small force and hope for surprise, or invade with a large force and lose surprise to a much better prepared enemy. We estimated Russia could muster maybe 300,000 ground troops in total, but only a small fraction would be ready on day 1 or even day 7. Most are inexperienced conscripts. Sending them would be near suicidal. Russia would thus need to pull units out of Ukraine, reducing the roughly 700,000 involved there down to perhaps 400,000 or 500,000, the ballpark Russia had in fall 2024. In theory, 300,000 to 400,000 could hold Ukraine if the Air Force supported them, but much of the Air Force would need to be redirected to the Baltics. That cannot be done quickly without alerting NATO. Even the fact troops are slowly being removed from Ukraine would be suspicious. Troops withdrawn from Ukraine would likely be put on fake leave, rather than held at full readiness near staging areas, adding to deployment time. Realistically, Russia might assemble some 150,000 Ukraine war veterans plus another 50,000 contract troops, of which 20,000 plus would be tied down in Kaliningrad. At most, another 100,000 conscripts could be mustered. The rest must remain to provide security to other parts of Russia. This is already a huge ask, as it means the new war must have a wider support in the population. The air war is a further issue for Russia. Baltic operations require flights 100 to 200 miles beyond Russian long-range SAM defense umbrellas, and NATO's planes are technologically superior. NATO has roughly 550 combat jets nearby, of which 450 capable air-to-air fighters. Those are well in range to be used almost immediately. Russia may field some 500 capable to mediocre fighter jets. Maintenance reduces available aircraft for both sides, but commitments to Ukraine and forces in the Far East hurt Russia more. NATO would likely achieve at least quantitative parity and a qualitative edge in the opening days. Russia would struggle to add planes in the following weeks, while NATO could rapidly put additional F-35s into the fight using air tankers and relocate further planes across Germany. Basically, in the air, Russia would lose, and probably lose badly, after a few weeks, leaving ground forces exposed without reliable air support. The terrain helps NATO more. While flat, the region is crisscrossed with rivers, wetlands, especially in Estonia, and forests. Those natural obstacles, combined with a sensor and drone-saturated battlefield, slow large vehicle formations and expose them to fire. And remember, speed would be of the essence for Russia here. A long, slow invasion doesn't suit them one bit, as NATO could muster a much greater force if given enough time. 3 logical push axes seem likely: toward Tallinn along the coast, south of Lakes Peipus and Pikva, aiming for the Gulf of Riga to cut off the north, and a large bloody push from Belarus toward Kaliningrad to cut the Baltics off and support Kaliningrad. If Russia somehow connected to Kaliningrad despite Poland's forces and German and US contingents nearby, the Baltics could be in some trouble. But the Nemunas River, a 100 to 200 meter wide barrier, would be a major obstacle. Simulating the invasion in detail is futile, But the likely end state, assuming Belarus cooperates, is Russia holding only parts of the Baltics temporarily. An initial temporary corridor to Kaliningrad would probably eventually be severed by NATO. At best, Russia might hold most of Estonia if it reached and held positions on the Gulf of Riga. Sea resupply there would not be easy for NATO, though the islands would likely remain under NATO's control. In theory, everything north of River Daugava might also be Russian, splitting Latvia in half, but even that is frankly unlikely. Even holding entire Estonia long-term would require a united, mobilized Russia ready to call up several 100,000 reservists and a fractured NATO that delays significant reinforcements. Plus, it would require complete surprise. Today, clues would almost certainly be spotted days or weeks in advance. There is just too many things that would have to align perfectly for Russia for it to work. Then there is the nuclear question. NATO could use a tactical nuclear weapon as a warning the moment Russia enters the Baltics. Or Russia could use one if Kaliningrad or Belarus are attacked. Or even if NATO force deluge into Lithuania proves to be too much to handle. Escalation dynamics are unpredictable, but Russia is the more likely candidate for nuclear use. Without nuclear weapons, it cannot match NATO's conventional power. Thus, if Russia does hold Baltic territory and Kaliningrad was invaded, escalation to nuclear war would become a distinct risk. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.